The portrayal of teens in this book was kind of frightening to me. I mean, it's the cruelty, the extent, and I guess I don't know. It was easy for me to say, gosh, could this really be happening in my town, my high school? And is that maybe one of your points that, you know, don't put a blind eye to this. This could be happening anywhere, and does that kind of cruel bullying happens in all sorts of small towns.
And, you know, if you look historically at school shootings, it's not in inner cities. That's not where this is happening. It's in affluent towns. It's in small towns. I actually just got back from speaking to a group of high school kids, 150 kids who've read this book. And it was one of the most amazing discussions of my career to talk to these kids. And one of the things that came up was that they felt the reason that you see more cliques in a small town high school is because when you're in an inner city, there's almost an unbelievable chance that you'll find somebody to connect with in a big school. But when your school's a little smaller, when, you know, everything feels a little tighter in a tiny town, you know, or a town where the cliques are well set and the competition's well set, in a way, they felt that it's more likely to happen at a school like theirs. That was the kind of town I was in. The other thing they said, which absolutely fascinated me, it was a great opening for discussion. A girl raised her hand who was very clearly a very smart girl, and she said, well, I want to talk about the fact that some kids who haven't finished this book are what we would call the popular kids. And so I said, all right, who hasn't finished the book? So about 6 kids raised their hand, and I said, well, why haven't you finished? And 2 kids said their mom stole the book before they could finish it. And then another kid said, well, I was doing my college applications. I said, okay, did anyone here not finish this book because they felt this couldn't happen here, because they felt it wasn't a worthy topic? And no one said that. And a girl raised her hand, and she goes, well, I'm one of the popular kids. I am on the school soccer team, and I'm an athlete. And I just want to point out that sometimes bullying can go both ways. That just like we might say something that we shouldn't to a kid who is really smart and make fun of them, you know, sometimes they might be saying things about us and making judgment calls that aren't true. And she said, like, for example, the fact that that's why the book wasn't finished. And she said, there are so many times I've wanted to do something that's really out of my comfort range, like try out for a school play, you know, or join the quiz bowl. And I don't do it because I'm afraid they're going to laugh at me and say, you don't really want to be here.
Yeah.
And so I think that sense of we might at any moment be rejected, it really doesn't matter if you're the Peter or you're the popular kid. And I think that's really interesting that, you know, people always think that the victims are a certain kind of people, but I think you live your life as a teenager either trying to fly under the radar, you know, because you are popular and you live in fear that all your friends are going to find out you're not nearly as cool as they seem to think you are.
Like Josie in the
Like Josie, right, and Matt. Or you wind up like Peter, being so unaware of what other people think of you that you become the scapegoat.
But is that also a function of small town? Because what I got from this was the sense that these characters were all cast in grade school. The fact that, you know, Peter and Josie and Matt
That's what made it
really
so
kind of carried all the way through. And I wonder, I don't know much about Columbine or the other shootings. I wonder if those are also scenarios where those kids in small towns were kind of bullied from the get-go.
Yeah. I think bullying starts off, like I said, awfully young, 5 years old. You know, knowing which kid to pick to pull the chair out from, to me, was just amazing when I was watching that in my son's kindergarten class. But I do know in my town, for example, the same kids, you go to school with them the whole way through. And about midway, 7th grade, a new school dumps in. You know, so we call it the fresh blood year, because there are all these new people to be friends with and also to tease. And it makes for a very interesting transition year in middle school. You know, so I do think that's definitely part of it. The less you shake up a group of students and offer them new opportunities to not only make friends, but also to reinvent themselves, which we all do, you know, at many points. I think that's when things begin to get devastating. This group of kids, I asked them, I said, okay, raise your hand if you used to have a friend that you no longer keep in touch with anymore because you're in different groups, different cliques. And everyone in the audience raised their hand. And I said, how many of you kind of wish you could sit down with that friend with none of your other new friends around and just ask how things are going? And they all raised their hand again. You know, it was really fascinating to see how they feel and how they realize what they've left behind too.
Did you have that experience growing up? Your bio on your website was great, of course. You're totally normal growing up.
Yeah.
Mom, was there any problems?
Yeah.
But I mean, did you have that experience on Long Island, kind of knowing kids first through 12th grade?
I grew up in a really, really big school district.
Okay.
So there were like 5 or 6 elementary schools. The high school that I went to had, I think there were over 1,000 kids in my graduating class alone. So it was almost as big as the college I went to.
Right.
So no, I really didn't feel that. And honestly, by the time I got to high school, I was able to find kids like me. And I had a great time in high school because it didn't really matter what other kids were saying to me, because I did have my group of friends that I felt comfortable with. And I really do think that's probably the most important thing in terms of these kids who are on the fringe. You know, it's not just feeling safe in school, it's feeling like you have a buddy when you go to school.
Mm-hmm.